you, Dr. Priscilla Chang, for being here, and thank you for CooperVision for being a wonderful WooU partner. And we are really excited. We've learned a lot, so now we want to hear how we can actually implement this in our practice. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm really excited to be here to, support any myopia management education. But ultimately, we want to change the outcomes that we see in our chair for good. So we don't want these patients to continue to have progression because we know that is expected. So there's a lot of children that we can help. So all of you who are in this room, thank you for your interest on this topic. But definitely know that we're a great industry partner in this space because we're constantly trying to find ways to help you make this easier and, from the implementation standpoint, but also just have a reliable evidence-based solution for when you have that patient in your chair. And so, like I mentioned, there are a lot of kids you can help using census data and looking at how many kids we can help. Every eye doctor in the US, so optometrists, ophthalmologists, there are 278 children with myopia between the ages of 5 to 17. So there's an abundance of opportunity for us to be able to diagnose these patients and also be able to offer them implementation, treatment options and solution. And if you don't have it, if you feel like you don't have these patients in your chair, they're around your community. I know, today's talked a little bit about how do you identify them, right? Can we start identifying those pre-myopes, those who do not have enough of a hyperopic reserve, to start that conversation about myopia management and that there's something that we can do for those kids as well. This was mentioned earlier, but did you know that myopia does progress faster into winter? And we're still in the winter right now. Spring starts in March 20th. So this is really a critical period because a lot of our patients are spending more time indoors because it's colder outside. But it's really critical to educate our patients on this effect, but very important for us to be monitoring these patients more closely, ahead of spring so that, they are aware that there are benefits to outdoor time, even if it's cloudy outside and things like that. As we know, an 8-year-old's myopia worsens 2 times faster than a 12-year-old. So the earlier the onset, the more likely that myopia is going to progress, and the more likely the patient's going to be left with a higher amount of myopia as they enter into adulthood. It's really never too late for us to intervene. So if we see that growing tween in our chair and they have myopia, we can talk about myopia management. But similar to amblyopia, where there's a window of time where the treatment really leads to the best long-term outcomes, that's why we want you to start identifying these children much earlier and bringing them in for their comprehensive eye exams and screening them if we, think they're at higher risk of developing myopia or having myopia progression. In fact, the recommendation is not waiting for progression. From the CLEAR study group, and as you can see here from myopia profile, there is limited value in using that past progression to predict future progression. And myopia management really needs to be initiated when myopia is present. We can't wait for progression to start because we're wasting time. And knowing that, we're not the first people to talk about this as a standard of care, but it's been nearly 4 years ago that the World Council of Optometry had declared myopia management as a standard of care. And it's not just optometry. Our pediatric and ophthalmology counterparts are also supporting this. Here's a quote from Dr. Constant in Miami. She said, "If I can educate, I also need an optometrist that I can send that patient to. And if I'm going to say how important this is, I want to say in the same breath, go and see Dr. So-and-so. This is what they can do for you." And this is where, it's really important for doctors who are kind of scared to get started. We have a solution that can help you because this is a soft contact lens that fits like any other soft contact lens. So no specific fitting guide, but we want more doctors in the community who have this available in their toolkit that pediatricians can refer over to. So we definitely don't want to be the doctors where someone refers them to us and we're like, I don't actually know anything about this, right? We want to be able to be proactive about this and offer that care. And they should be hearing it from us. And of course, the benefits for slowing myopia, it's not just, those ocular health concerns, but lower amount of prescription just means they have better unaided vision. I feel like I talked about this story when I talked to patients whose parents maybe had refractive surgery and they forgot what it was like to be myopic, right? If they have a moderate amount of myopia or even higher, that's going to impact their quality of life. And so if there's something we can do about it, why aren't we doing something to prevent that unaided acuity as well? And the importance of managing myopia, we mentioned the benefits of slowing myopia by just 1 diopter. And of the many things that we're concerned about, the one that I get most excited that we can do something about is reducing the risk of myopic maculopathy, because that's the one we don't have any solutions for. Whereas glaucoma, we have some treatments for cataracts. We can do earlier cataract surgery on those patients, right? But there's nothing we could do about myopic maculopathy. And if you look at this chart here, and we're looking at the risk factor of developing those top 4 conditions that are associated with long-term high myopia, you can see that after about a -3 diopter, the risk of developing those 4 conditions exponentially increase, right? So, we've been going around the country talking to doctors, and we're like, well, to keep it simple, if we're trying to set a goal, if we could set a goal to get these kids no higher than a -3 when they graduate high school, that means they've cleared those years of, where the myopia could have progressed much faster. And that would be a good target to aim for if you're looking for one. But ultimately, we want to be your partner in terms of providing a portfolio of evidence-based interventions for myopia management. We have our soft contact lens, the MiSight 1-Day, which I'll talk about a little bit more today. We also have our Ortho-K lens, Paragon CRT, one of the first Ortho-K lenses approved in the United States, and still is one of the more preferred brands as well. So we have that available to support you. We also kind of down the line do have spectacle lens coming through our partnership for SightGlass Vision. I just put it here because we are working on our pipeline for other options as well, to have you armed with the toolkit of different options for myopia management. At this point, we do not have a timeline. I know it was asked earlier, when will this be available? And your guess is as good as mine, because when working with the FDA, things just take more time. We did get approval for breakthrough device designation last year in January. So that just means we have more touch points with the FDA to ensure that we can get that approval. And so this is what you have in your toolkit right now. So I'm going to dive into MiSight 1-Day. Some of you asked how exactly it works. So the technology in the MiSight 1-Day lens is called active control technology. This lens, as you can look at this design, you can see that it looks different than a multifocal contact lens. You have areas that are dark purple, light purple, and the light purple areas is the correction zone. So that's where the patient is experiencing clear vision through those zones. And then the treatment zones, that's going to induce 2 diopters of myopic defocus. You can see in the diagram on the top right, we're moving some of that defocus from behind the eye to in front of, or behind the retina to in front of the retina. So when I'm explaining this to patients, I tell them that we have a dual purpose lens, one that will correct vision as well as provide myopia control by shifting how light enters into the eye and removing one of the signaling pathways for the eyes to grow longer. And as was mentioned earlier, we are backed by a robust study that was done on specifically contact lenses in children. This is the longest running soft contact lens study among children, 7 years in duration, multi-center, prospective, randomized initial stage, and it does span that age span from 8 to 18. So I know some of you had asked about what about younger patients, but you can see in the way we designed the study, the first 3 years looked at 8 to 12 years old at the start of treatment. And then the following 3 years, we moved all the patients into MiSight. So those patients are now, slightly older cohort. And then the last year, the 7 years, when we looked at whether or not there was rebound. So all these 7-year studies were completed before 2021. So it's been a while since we've had this robust evidence, and we continue to have papers, posters that continue to show that this is a repeatable real-world finding that we're getting. And what we hear from parents is that they actually really like the fact that MiSight has FDA approval. It helps them move forward with the process, and it builds trust with the provider as well as with the treatment intervention. So MiSight 1-Day contact lenses, what did we learn from those 7 years? We learned that for children, they're really easy to use. Most kids actually saw better than 20/20 vision. And so when you look at those optics, I think some doctors will think about multifocal optics, but these are not lenses that were a rebranding of multifocal lenses. This is that category of dual focus lens. And because we have those distinct areas of vision, these patients see very, very well. These children also were able to confidently put these lenses in and out themselves as young as age 8. We actually have kids on our YouTube channel for MiSight that teaches other kids how to put lenses in and out. And the two that are on there, Olivia and Madeline, are patients of a local doctor in SoCal, and they were 8 years old in that video. So we know as young as age 8, they can put those lenses in and out. There's a very strong safety profile as well because we know that parents like hearing that we throw the bacteria away every night. So these are daily disposable contact lenses. And in fact, 90% of the children prefer MiSight one-day contact lenses over their glasses because of the convenience and the vision. And when we talk to them, they also, we forget that sometimes these kids kind of get scared with how their glasses or their prescription continues to change. And, we know as eye doctors that there's so many benefits for wearing contact lenses, and it's not just the vision, but there's also the confidence that they get, right? And so this is just a quote from one of the patients that were in the MiSight lens, where he mentioned from 3rd grade to about 7th grade, he wore glasses, and had to stop playing a few sports because of the risk of the glasses breaking. And when you hear that, you're like, I can probably think of a patient that I've seen in my career that, told me something similar, right? And this patient made me unhappy because I couldn't do the things I love. And getting contact lenses definitely boosted my confidence with just doing what I used to do and helped me get back to my normal self. And I love that quote, because we want to be able to improve the quality of life for our patients. So diving in a little bit on the efficacy of MiSight one-day lens, like I mentioned earlier, we have 3 parts to the study. I'm just going to dive into really kind of that first part because that's where the efficacy really is a number that you can lean on and quote when you're talking to your patients. But the summary of that really is that 59% of reduction in myopia progression on average across those 3 years. There's a 52% reduction in axial length growth as well. And, our stance is that you don't need an optical biometer to get started. You just need to get started. And 41% of the patients who were in the MiSight one-day group showed no meaningful progression. And I'm going to show you a graph here. This is looking at the distribution of refractive errors across 3 years and how they changed. And you can see here on the bottom axis, you can see we're grouping them by either patients who had minus a quarter diopter or less of progression versus those who had minus 0.75 diopters or more progression. And those that are in the orange were the ones in our control group in the ProClear one day versus the ones in a purple would be the MiSight one day. And you could see, like I mentioned, 41% of the patients who were in MiSight one day had no meaningful progression because if they had a quarter diopter, that wasn't really meaningful. But if I draw your attention to the orange bar, that 4% had no meaningful progression. So what that tells us is if you flip that, 96% of the patients had progression. So we know that myopia will progress. It's just a matter of when, right? So again, like I mentioned earlier, we're not waiting for progression. We're not waiting for progression to start intervening. And that's why it's important to have this conversation with every myope that's coming in your chair and telling them that there's a kid that you can help, right? And I just want to share a pearl when we're talking to parents. How do we talk about myopia in a short and concise way? The problem of myopia can be very succinct by just saying that the eye is growing too long, growing too fast, and the structures in the eyes are getting weaker. So you can say bad news. Good news is there's something we can do about it to treat it from getting worse. And we also have graphics in some of our resources that can help with that conversation, especially if the parents or the patient are visual learners. So be sure to show them what's the difference between a longer eye and a shorter eye, and so that they can go home and review this with their partner or with the family. And that's where that graphic is. And ultimately, when we're talking about myopia management, there's beginners and there's masters. And sometimes you look in the space and you see specialists who do this every day. But in reality, it's like, what does it take to go from a beginner to a master? You kind of just need to get started and start hearing the conversations and what's resonating with parents. And when I first got started, I definitely experienced rejection. We are really excited to talk about this. And sometimes you have some parents who are just like, we're not ready for it. We didn't, set up budget for this, things like that. But that's totally okay. We just want to make sure we follow up with them in a more frequent cadence so that when they are ready, we can do something about it. And we can also monitor the patient to ensure that they don't have progression because we know reducing the amount of correction appropriate for a myope would lead to progression. So it's counterintuitive, but when you share that with patients, they're more likely to come back for those more frequent follow-ups because we're making sure to intervene the moment we see a change if they're not ready for myopia management. But again, you got to practice this conversation. We should not be withholding this information as an option to these patients and judging whether or not they can pay for it. Ultimately, having the FDA approved option legitimizes this for all of us, and we have to take advantage of the resources that we have available in our toolkit. And kids grow up fast, so we know myopia does not wait. You can make a difference today and give them their best tomorrow. I want to end by talking about the Myopia Collective. If you haven't heard of this, this is our partnership with the American Optometric Association, really trying to rally the profession of optometry, all of our allies, so our pediatrician counterparts, our ophthalmology counterparts, and school nurses, everybody. We want everybody to understand that we have to elevate a new standard of care for the children with myopia. This is completely free to join. If you haven't joined, I welcome you to join. There's information that's shared on a quarterly basis that can help, with how you educate the public about myopia. And I just want to thank you for helping to protect these kids' vision for the future. And this is my contact information. If there's any questions about MiSight, Paragon CRT, or resources that we have, feel free to reach out. I can connect you with somebody if I, don't have the answers for you, but definitely lean on us as a resource. And I want to open it up for questions. I know there were some questions earlier about myopia or MiSight, about our portfolio here. Let's see. I see a question here about, are there plans to create a MiSight toric lens? And I would say yes, of course. We hear you. We know some patients have astigmatism. What do we do for them? We definitely have to lean on our off-label options. And I won't go into that, but we're working on that, and that is in the pipeline. I can only see the chat, so I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I can look at our Q&A here. Let's see. There was a question about how do you explain near blur with MiSight to parents? There shouldn't be any near blur because as you saw from the way the lens is designed, it should provide that patient with clear spectacle-free vision. If there is near blur present, I would think that there's an accommodative issue that wasn't ruled out before they started on MiSight. So definitely do that binocular vision workup and make sure that there's no other underlying accommodative issues that are affecting that patient. Let's see, there's a question about hyperopic reserve. If a patient is hyperopic, how do you prescribe to keep them hyperopic? I think when she was talking about it, as we talk about hyperopic reserve, typically we're looking at patients' prescriptions and seeing what is their risk of developing myopia. And if they do not have enough reserve, that's when we do something about it. Meaning we have a conversation about the lifestyle modifications that can be done, like spending time outside, reducing near work, things like that, taking frequent breaks. But I'm personally in latent hyperope, so patients can definitely accommodate through the hyperopia, and there's nothing we can do to use lenses to delay that myopia onset. So really the age is an indicator. Age with the cycloplegic refraction is an indicator for when we might be more concerned about bringing them in more frequently than that annual eye exam to see if they've kind of become ametropic and then crossed over and became myopic. Let's see. When MiSight stopped, is there still no rebound? So in the 7-year study, the last year was looking for rebound. And so that's, from the IMI, typically studies that are looking at rebound are just looking at 1 year after discontinuing the intervention. But from our studies, there was no rebound with MiSight. So that's great news. There was a question about MiSight being purchased online. So how is CooperVision supporting private practice doctors? And my response to that is that we have rebates that can only be used on the product if the patient is purchasing it from the doctor that they got an eye exam from. And so that's definitely something that we can further discuss with the myopia sales rep to ensure that the staff, you as well as the patients, are taking advantage of those rebates and ensure that those patients are staying in-house for you, so you continue to follow their myopia closely. And I believe that is it. That wraps up the evening. Again, feel free to reach out to me if there's any unanswered questions. Please also, join the Myopia Collective if you haven't joined already. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in today.